Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host on Tuesdays, Ethan, back here again telling you all things fantasy football related. We're getting right into it in the nitty gritty. Breaking news, as we're taping this, Bill O'Brien just got the boot. So my first coach firing predictions, it was a week. Well, I said by week 5. I extended it, right? And I did say, I thought there'd be a coach firing by week 4. It's after week 4 soon, right? We're still in week 4 technically, because as we're taping this, the Monday night games haven't played because, as we know, the Patriots do play Monday night alongside Green Bay, and the Falcons, they play, and the Patriots and Kansas City play Monday night simultaneously. This is not a doubleheader game. It is back-to-back, so we'll know those results on Tuesday morning when you wake up. But like I said, as we're taping this, the games have not happened yet. Bill O'Brien has been the first head coach fired of the 2020 NFL season. So the precedent has been set. No coach is safe. Even during a pandemic, you can still catch the boot. So what does that really mean exactly? Well, I'm here to tell you that it could mean a whole lot for this Houston team in a way that could set the tone for how they're going to move on in the future. So keep in mind, this team does not have a first or second round pick in the upcoming draft. So a firing of their head coach does not necessarily mean that they're looking to, put the season away, wait till next year, because next year, there's not a lot of immediate help that you can sit here and say that is going to be available, especially in a draft like this one where COVID is affecting literally everything, every aspect of our lives, the draft included, right? This is a COVID-filled draft. There's people who have sat out the year. There are people who sat out and now coming back to play. There are people who are playing at different times. It's going to be an interesting NFL draft regardless, right? So here we are trying to figure everything out piece by piece. And so all these GMs, right? We're not GMs. We're a bunch of armchair GMs, a bunch of laying lazy couch, love seat GMs, whatever one you want to call it, right? We're one of those people. We're all one of those people at the end of the day, especially for fantasy purposes. But here's the situation. The Texans have not been able to protect Deshaun Watson for majority of his career, probably all of his career. They have not been able to protect him in a way that lets him do what he does best. And they also have not been able to sustain, they can't run the ball. And it's not because they don't have the ability to run the ball. It's just that, unfortunately, right now, their defense gives up too many points. Right? They gave up 31 points to Minnesota. Shout out to Minnesota because they look to be figuring some things out, even though I'm still questionable about their defense because their defense is hurt all over the place. Like this, if they play an actual real offensive team, there might be some issues once again. But for now, they're 2-2. They're staying afloat. Right? They're getting together. I'm sorry, not 2-2. They're 1-3. They're trying to get some stuff. They could have been 2-2, but they figured some things out in this game and they did some adjustments. Dalvin Cook looks really solid. We're losing fantasy running backs day by day here on the Fantasy Football Podcast. So let's just keep in mind that, your best ability is availability right now. And later on in the podcast, I'm going to say something that does kind of contradict this, but here we go. What does this Texans team really mean now? Where do we have them, right? Where does Houston stand as far as an NFL quality team, right? So let's look up some numbers, right? If we look up Houston Texans football team and we just look at their statistics on ESPN, we're not even going to go into the deep old takes, because we all see, even if you look up Houston Texans, everything is about Bill O'Brien being fired after the 0-4 start. And this was a predictable move, right? Let's break it down here. The Houston Texans firing Bill O'Brien after an 0-4 start after what happened in this offseason makes a little bit of sense. There's a lot of pressure on him to be good. And there was also a lot of pressure to showcase that, the DeAndre Hopkins thing was a bit overblown. Well, to be honest, it was not a bit overblown. DeAndre Hopkins has showcased himself as one of the best wide receivers in the league. Not to say that he wasn't beforehand, but it definitely looks like him and Kyler Murray have this connection. And he's just been racking up receptions on receptions on receptions. And you could sit here and argue that, Bill O'Brien had one of the tougher starts in the league this year. And it was only going to get a little bit easier as, they played the Chiefs week 1, Ravens week 2, the Steelers defense week 3, right? And they actually did a fair enough job against Steelers, and they competed, right? They competed against the Vikings. Now, granted, they gave up 31 points defensively, and that's the thing. On average, they're giving up about 30 points a game on defense. That's not good. And they have yet to put up anywhere close to 25 points a game or in any game this year. And it makes sense because their best weapon is a guy who's in and out of the lineup all the time, and Deshaun Watson has no time to really look downfield, make any solid reads. He's running for his life. And that honestly stunts your quarterback's development more than it makes them better. I'm starting to feel like this is a trend. When we get guys who are athletic, guys who can make a lot of throws, and, I feel like Deshaun Watson's a different case because he's not that typical athlete quarterback who has a big arm but doesn't really go through progression and stuff. I think that Deshaun Watson is capable of reading the defense and reading the field and seeing guys. And I think his time at Clemson showed that he was a winner and he's able to do some things. And he does have that magic that people like to put on him. The thing about it is he might have a little bit of the punch drunk syndrome that Michael Vick got during the Eagles years where they were supposed to be the dream team. That didn't work out too well for them. But what I mean is, he may not be sitting here taking hits all day and taking sacks, but the constant amounts of pressure does, in fact, hurt you in a really bad way as a quarterback for years to come. My biggest, example of this right now in the modern day football era has to be Carson Wentz. I really don't think Carson Wentz is as bad as people say. He's been playing a lot of hero ball. Right. And that's the thing that gets him. He's been trying to play hero ball for a long time in this Eagles offense because he felt like he needed to be the hero because that's who he was at North Dakota State. That's who he was drafted to be, the savior of the Eagles. And then he kind of delivered it in his first year, got hurt, really wasn't ready his second year coming back. And then the third year, of course, it got really rough. Injuries everywhere, and he had to do a lot on his own. And then he drugged that team. Like I said, he drugged that team to the playoffs, and then he got a concussion. And now we're back here again. Eagles injured all over the place. We're having to get wide receivers off the side of the road. The offensive line is in shambles, and he's running for his life. And he's having to, one thing he doesn't have to do, he's not throwing the ball away when there's nothing there. He's just keeping his eyes downfield while also running for his life, going back 15, 16 yards down. And it's just deteriorating what I think is a really good special talent level quarterback because he keeps thinking that he has to play outside of himself because he doesn't have any faith in his protection. I don't think Deshaun Watson has any faith in his protection, and that's the biggest thing that could change the landscape of a quarterback. And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are worried about Joe Burrow right now is because there's no protection. There's no protection for Joe Burrow. If it was me, I'm telling Joe Burrow, tweak a little hammy, real quick for this game. You know what I mean? We don't need to see Cleveland have to go up against the Ravens. I'm sorry, not Cleveland, but Cincinnati. You don't have to play against Lamar and the gang. I don't want to see that defense torture you like this. Like, this was a good game to sit here and see what he's capable of, but they don't have the capacity. They're barely a football team at all. Now, granted, right? A little gloat. They really could be 3-1 if all intents and purposes, right? They had a really bad game against the Browns. Other than that, they had winnable games week 1. They should have won week 1. Bogus call. They lost week 2 fairly. They had a tie against the Eagles, who are, all intents and purposes, I don't know what their football team is. And they won this week. They're 1-1-1. Or I'm sorry, they're 1-2-1. But they could be 3-1. All intents and purposes. It's just, they could be 3-1. But at the end of the day, the team is not very good. It would be one of those cases where it's a team that's won games, but they're not good. Like, I don't have a specific mantra about it, but it's just a team that is winning games, but we all know that they are kind of sus. If you play Among Us, you know what I'm talking about, right? They're kind of sus. They don't look like the real deal. And we have a couple of those teams still walking around, like the Bears. They're not looking great. Nick Foles did not look great. And we're trying to figure out what they are going to become, because it's not like once you take out your starting QB, there's just no way you're going back. So they're going to have to stick it out with Nick Foles, and I don't know if he's going to be the guy to get it done. But moving back to the Texans and this whole theory here, I think that the worse Deshaun Watson's O-line gets, and the more he has to play with a bad O-line, this is what we're going to keep seeing. We're going to keep seeing times where if they go down a score or two and they have to just go straight into passing downs every time, they are going to get tortured. Deshaun is going to get tortured back there. His offensive line is horrendous. Not one of the best in the league. If I probably looked up pressure stats right now, it would not be great for the Texans. And it was not great last year. He was in the bottom half of the league in, pressures had on quarterbacks. He's just a guy who's always under constant duress. And that's a recipe for disaster. For fantasy purposes, right? We're all in love with the fact that, the connection with certain guys like Jordan Atkins. I like Jordan Atkins, actually, as a tight end. He's on my bench right now. I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with that. I haven't needed to put him in one league just because I have Austin Hooper, and thank God for the Cowboys and not being able to defend a fly. They gave up a lot of points last Sunday, which we'll talk about in the Sunday Pain segment. That's what I call them, Sunday Pains, where we discuss all things that happened in the games on Sunday. For the most part, we're going to be talking about that sort of thing. And then moving forward, I don't know what I'm going to do with the Texans tight ends. Now, let's keep in mind, their statistics across the board for Houston are kind of all over the place. Their best receiver is Will Fuller, who has 274 receiving yards. Not bad, but he did miss a game. He had a game basically where he did nothing. He's played all 4, but he's doing fine. He has when your best 2 receivers are Randall Cobb and Will Fuller, when you came from a time where you had DeAndre Hopkins, and then you have Brandon Cooks, who has not panned out really at all. He still doesn't have either he's not getting the offense just yet, or just hasn't found his stride. He does have 10 receptions on the year, which in retrospect, everybody else, he's only 4 receptions behind the next 2, which is Jordan Atkins, Randall Cobb, and then Will Fuller, of course, has 18 receptions. He's had 21 targets, so it's just he's not getting the ball in proper places. It's not looking well. He has no touchdowns. If you drafted Trent or Brandon Cooks to be what you think Brandon Cooks could be in an offense like the Houston Texans, where they were airing it out and trying to get the money balls, that's what Will Fuller is. And the thing about Will Fuller is you never know when somebody's going to be healthy. With the name Will Fuller V, is tough. It's a tough scene. But at the same time, it's looking well for him right now. So if you're playing with Will Fuller, you're having a good time. If you're using if you have David Johnson, who by all accounts, he's had 51 rushing attempts for only 197 yards. He averages 4 yards per carry. He has 2 touchdowns on the year. He's not the greatest right now, right? Let's keep that in mind. He's not the best back that you have available to you. If you drafted him in like the 3rd or 4th round, you're kind of scratching your head a little bit and trying to figure either he's off your team via trade or you're just kind of hoping things get better. But the biggest thing is that the Texans are giving up 30 points a game. You can't run the ball playing down 30 points a game. It's not feasible. But we're going to move on. Hopefully the Texans can figure some things out. But they're out of a coach, and we're out of time for this first segment. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back. Let's talk about Sunday pains when we return. GSMC.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, guys, we're back. GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast here, and we are about to get into a segment that I'm calling now Sunday Pains. That's what I'm talking about, Sunday Pains, because all Sunday does is bring me pain when it comes to fantasy football stuff, day in and day out, and it's starting to get a little bit tiresome, I gotta say. It's not always fun. I'm not enjoying watching football sometimes, but I'm glad it's back because I'd rather be watching football and it's bringing me pain than other things in life. Well, let's get it, shall we? We're going to talk about the Arizona game because I was everybody's 2-week darling. Arizona, when they started 2-0, things were starting to get interesting. They have lost 1 game at home, 1 game on the road, but what does that really matter when you have no fans in the stands? Kyler Murray went 24 of 31, 133 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, was sacked once. He had a 69.9 QBR and a 116.7 quarterback rating. On the flip side, Teddy Bridgewater, 26 of 37. 276 yards. He averaged 7.5 yards per play, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, a 93.6 QBR, and a quarterback rating of 98.5. So here's the deal, right? If we look at the total game stats here, you can clearly see that things just weren't well for Arizona. They just didn't allow things to go well, as in Carolina. Carolina had a total offensive yardage of 444 to Arizona's total yards of 262. That's not really great. Your leading rusher was Kyler Murray, right, with 78 yards on 6 carries, and some of them were not designed runs, of course. We know how it gets down. Receiving yards across the board. DeAndre Hopkins had 7 receptions for 41 yards. Robbie Anderson had 8 receptions for 99 yards. It just was not working well. No. 9 more first downs for Carolina. That's pretty significant. And their third down efficiency really told the story. When you are 3 of 9 on third downs to 7 to 7 to 11, you're not getting off the field as a defense. Their defense couldn't get off the field. They couldn't get the ball back in Kyler Murray's hands, and that's a big reason why, is they could not stop them on third downs. They had about 2 more yards per play than the Arizona Cardinals. And all in all, the passing game really looked good for Teddy Bridgewater. I think Teddy Bridgewater has looked really good. He's about as good as advertised as what you would think would be. And let's keep in mind, they don't have their best player on roster offensively in Christian McCaffrey. And Mike Davis really has not let them miss a beat. Now, is he Christian McCaffrey? Of course not. I'm not sitting here saying that he's Christian McCaffrey. But, you know, people might be I've been saying this, right? Let's not say people. Let's say me, because I've said this. Running backs in this league are at an overall abundance. You can get a serviceable running back to replace a lot of the workload that you would need from a starter who may give you more upside because of their talent, potential, ability of what they're able to do on the field. It gives you more looks. You have more packages they're able to run because of what they're capable of. But if you're just trying to win games, there are running backs that are out there that you can win games with. We saw it. The Giants, they lose Saquon. They get serviceable running backs off the waiver wire. They just bring up, you know, the Devontae, right? They bring him up. They have running backs available to get the job done out there in the whole league. Devontae Freeman looks solid. They didn't win the game, but they kept it close. It wasn't a drubbing. Look at over here with the 49ers. They do this for a living. They just bring in guys to run the ball. Now, this goes against my take that Alvin Kamara is like one of the best players in the league because he's a running back or whatever the case may be. I feel like Alvin Kamara is just different because of what the Saints ask of him to do, right? The Saints aren't actually using him as a traditional running back for all intents and purposes, right? At least not in philosophically. They're not. That's what Latavius Murray is there for, to beat the brakes off of the defense, running head first, gashing and slashing. They use Latavius Murray to tire people out. Alvin Kamara is there to give the Saints offense a whole different identity. In reality, they're basically going 5 wide every play when Alvin Kamara is on the field. And that's why he's able to get like 5 yards a carry, right? That's why he's able to do some things in the run game so effectively and so efficiently, is because they're not expecting him to actually be a part of the run game. Like, they have times where they run him up the middle, but the reason why they don't all the time is because he's way better in space. He's way better swinging out wide because people are expecting him to be hitting the flat routes. People are expecting him to hit wheel routes, like he did get one nice wheel route in the game against the Lions. Things were looking great. But to bring this back, Mike Davis, he's looked serviceable. And unfortunately, for guys who have Kenyon Drake, who are being hurt to the core, right? This is horrible if you have Kenyon Drake. I have a friend who's been trying to pawn off Kenyon Drake for weeks. 2.7 yards average per carry this game. Chase Edmonds had a couple carries. He had a touchdown as well in the receiving game. So that hurts you bad, for sure. And he also had 5 catches, 5 receptions. So Chase Edmonds, for all intents and purposes, had a pretty solid game fantasy-wise for you, better than Kenyon Drake did. Kenyon Drake, 2.7 yards per carry, 13 carries, 35 yards. He's just not getting the job done. This Arizona team, we're starting to see some trends here, right? Arizona, at the time of the first 2 weeks, they were darlings. We were seeing some things. And then they went up against a team like the Lions, right? And they're not a team that I feel like is particularly in a bad spot. I don't think they're the best, but I also don't think they're horrible. And what I'm starting to realize now, the Arizona Cardinals so far are not all that great on defense. And when your team is not that great on defense and you're forced to throw more than run, I think a lot of these teams are satisfied with Kyler Murray having 78 rushing yards and him not hitting his spots, because I think they'd rather make Kyler Murray prove that he can throw the ball way more than him beating you with his legs, because I don't think Kyler Murray has proven 100% that he can hit the throws all the time. And yes, he can be dynamic when he's on, But this is a little bit of the hot cold thing, right? This is what people said about Deshaun over the first few seasons of his career, where he wasn't nearly as the guy who I think he is now, where he's a little bit more proven now. We're still kind of out on the Kyler Murray thing. We don't know exactly what he is yet, and he has a lot of weapons around him. Of course, if you have Christian Kirk, you may be looking at him a little bit harder now because it seems like him and Christian Kirk have gotten a little bit of a chemistry when it comes to end zone touches. DeAndre Hopkins hasn't necessarily gotten in the end zone as much, and that's been a little bit alarming for those who own Hopkins. But at the same time, stay patient if you want to be, unless you get an offer that you feel you can't refuse. But for Carolina's rushing attack, they are just doing it by committee. 16 carries for Mike Davis, 10 carries for Reggie Bonifant. Bonifant. They just did it they just toughed it out. They won a game. Nobody played outside of themselves. They did what they did. Maybe the DJ Moore stuff is a little bit disappointing, right? You didn't expect DJ Moore to end up being, I guess, second option on this offense, and Robbie Anderson kind of taking the reins as the number one wide receiver here, but it is what it is, right? You can't always predict everything in fantasy football. Sometimes you just have to chalk up the L and move on. But are the Cardinals in trouble? Well, let's find out, shall we? The Cardinals, their schedule is the Jets, then the Cowboys, then the Seahawks, then the Dolphins. That's their next 4. So I'm not too certain that the Jets aren't going to. Well, I don't think the Jets are going to win this game at all, right? I don't think they're going to win. I don't know what the score line is. Some people, I think it's a -7 or something like that on the line if you're a betting guy, if the last time I checked. But for the Cardinals, I should say they're -7. The Cowboys game, this might end up being a shootout for all we know. Cowboys defense is horrendous. Unless something changes in the next 2 weeks. Arizona's defense is not that great either. There's still a lot of holes there like they were last year. And we know they beat the 49ers early in the first week, but it was week 1. Week 2, they beat a Washington team who honestly just is the Washington football team. They're not good right now. No one in the NFC East. You should not be proud of a win against any team in the NFC East. That's number 1. I think that's the biggest takeaway. If you have a win against an NFC East team, take it as half a win because they beat themselves most of the time anyway, or they're just not, they're not competent football teams yet. So take it with a grain of salt. They have 1.5 wins in my book. They lost to the Lions and they lost to the Panthers, but I think the Panthers loss is a worse loss because you would expect them to be able to move the ball down the field, but their defense, the Panthers, that is, I think they're well coached, man. I think they figured some things out, and they're coaching on the fly. This team might actually have some sniff. Like, they may have some oomph in them, man. They may be able to do some things. That's all I have to say on that matter. Let's move on. So, let's get the Saints out the way, so that way I'm not sitting here talking about the Saints all day. Saints are 2-2 now in a year where in reality they could be a whole lot of things. They could be 0-4 in some eyes. They could be 3-1, wherever the case you want to say. But the Saints buckled down. This was a must-win game in my category. I said that, I believe, on Friday's pod, where this was a must-win game for the Saints, or else we're looking at a 7-9 difference or something like a 10-6. This was a statement game for Breeze. If you watched the game, now a lot of people say they watch the games. They don't watch all these games. Drew Brees went 19 of 25, 246, averaged 9.8 yards per play, 2 touchdowns, an interception that got tipped at the line, whatever. 88 QBR, 116 rating as a passer. Drew Brees was on it today. And I mean, he was throwing balls that I haven't seen in like 7 games of Drew. He looked awesome. He looked great. Drew Brees looked like Drew that we haven't seen in a while. He looked sharp. He looked like the Brees of old that we like to say that we know, but he hasn't always been there. He was sacked 2 times, but there's a lot of things going on. There's injuries all over the place for the Saints. Before the game, during the game, there's people coming in and out. But all in all, Drew Brees looked like he got 4 weeks in him and he figured it out. They toughed it out. Matthew Stafford didn't have his best game. 17 of 31, 206, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He missed a lot of deep balls to a lot of different wide receivers. You know, the Adrian Peterson thing, I just don't understand it personally. Now, I believe Kerryon Johnson took a bit of a hit the last few drives of the game, and he was sit on the sideline. I think he got taken out of bounds. Like, he tried to step out of bounds, got hit something on the out of bounds, and he was laid flat for a while. I don't know what his injury status is going to be, but the DeAndre Swift is a guy you just have to play him. Like, this Adrian Peterson stuff is ridiculous. 11 carries for Adrian Peterson. Kerryon Johnson and DeAndre Swift accounted for 7 of them. I don't know if this is just the Patriots thing rubbing off, because, you know, the Patriots do this too sometimes, right? But also I feel like the Patriots just do this because they know they don't have the talent. If somebody is not that talented to get the touches and stuff, they just don't play them. Maybe that's what this is, but I just don't think Matt Patricia understands who he has. Like, it's really crazy. Matt Patricia is one loss away from being the same place Bill O'Brien is. Like, there are people in national media talking about Matt Patricia should be scrutinized way more because Bill Caldwell had this team at a different position, and it's done nothing but regress since Matt Patricia has come in. This is truth. This is truth. Now, Kenny Golladay, second game in, 4 receptions, 62 receiving yards, and a touchdown. That's nice for me since I own him for fantasy. But he should have had more. There was some missed throws by Matthew Stafford. That's for sure. Matthew Stafford also got sacked 3 times, which is a big thing for the Saints defense. That's what they needed to do. But the biggest takeaway here is Traquan Smith, which we'll probably get into after this break, as we're running a bit out of time. So we're going to take a break and then we'll come back. Let's talk about Traquan Smith and what is happening with this Saints offense.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, let's get back into it. Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. We're talking about Saints at the Detroit Lions. They were away, and I got to talk about it, man. I've been saying it. I said it in the offseason. Unfortunately, Traquan Smith won't be able to show this very, very much longer. I think that Michael Thomas will find himself back in the lineup, if not next week, the week after their bye week. So the Traquan Smith hype train is going to slowly come to an end. At least I think so. But 4 receptions, 54 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a 20-yard touchdown, I believe, or was it the one, not the touchdown? Either way, Traquan looked really good. Really solid guy. And I always said he showed the talent. Traquan has had the talent. He has the speed. He does not have the flash moves, right? He's not Odell when the ball touches his hands. He doesn't have the nice jukes. He doesn't have the spins. He doesn't have the break tackle ability as you would like to see out of a receiver. But that's not what he's there for. He's solid. He catches the ball and he does what he needs to do. And he knows situation. He fell on a ball that was fumbled by Josh Hill it fumbled 16 yards up the field, and he somehow was able to have the awareness to go and fall on it. That's big time. That's the first big time play he made. Second big time play, it was 3rd and 12. The Saints needed to convert in order to keep the drive alive, to basically shut the game down. And this is where the Saints typically are not the best at. right? They're not the best at having the game-sealing drives in recent time. It really does hurt. This is where all the Minneapolis Miracle stuff happens. This is where all those sort of things happen. That's when you need a Saints to finish off a drive to take a team away, but instead they give the ball back. Tre'Quan Smith came up with a humongous catch right then and there at the time, and he all did this while after, like, all his big plays came after the fact that he came out of the game hurt, injury. He looked like the wind was probably knocked out of him. That's what my guess is. But he came back and he balled out, as Michael Thomas told him to go do via text, which is hilarious to me because it made it seem like he told him something like some, prolific Messiah-esque text about how to become a great wide receiver, but it was just to say ball out 100 emoji. But that's what he did. Tre'Quan Smith balled out and did his thing. And, Emmanuel Sanders, who did start for me this week, 6 receptions, 93 yards. He's getting there. It looks like that connection is going somewhere. Alvin Kamara wasn't as featured as much in the passing game, but that's to be expected when for 3 straight weeks, the Saints were just dumping it down to him for so long. That just sort of happens. But it looks like Breeze is getting more comfortable with guys out there in the receiver land. Now, that also could mean a lot for Detroit's defense all in all, but I just think that they figured some things out and their offense was just clicking all the way. Let's keep in mind that in the running game department, Alvin Kamara had 19 carries, 83 yards, and a touchdown. Latavius Murray, who has been getting the similar amount of carries as Alvin Kamara has, 64 yards, 2 touchdowns. It's about time he's been rewarded for the hard running that he does. He does a lot of the dirty work for the Saints because sometimes our blocking isn't the best, but he will just punch through. He will punch through and finish drives. He will punch through and finish and fall forward. Latavius Murray doesn't fall backwards when he runs the ball. He's 6'2", like 220. He's a big guy. And that's the best thing that's one of the best acquisitions the Saints ever got, was when they let Mark Ingram go, they got Latavius Murray. And it didn't always work last year. It looked a little bit strange, but Latavius Murray this year looks to be a guy who's ready to take some names. Now, the Saints, interestingly enough, right, their schedule, I feel, is a little strange to see them make a run. So they have a bye week, week 6. They go up against the LA Chargers without Austin Eckler. You would hope to think that might mean something, but like I said, it may not be as an explosive passing offense, but let's keep in mind they still have Justin Jackson. They have Josh Kelly. They can get some stuff going, but our run defense is pretty solid. So I'm saying this for fantasy reasons. Right, this is a fantasy football podcast. So keep in mind when I say our run defense is solid, it's pretty solid. I'm not saying that you want to not start Josh Kelly, but also let's keep in mind he's not an Austin Eckler. Our secondary is still kind of weird. It all depends, of course, game-wise. This might be when Michael Thomas steps in. But if it was me, we're not 1-3, right? That was the fear. If we go 1-3, I feel like Michael Thomas plays week 5. Since we're 2-2 and we have a decent enough, if we get enough people back healthy, it's an ESPN game, right? It's a Monday night game against the Los Angeles Chargers. I have a strong inclination that Michael Thomas is not going to actually come back on this game, but he will be back week 7, October 26th versus Carolina, division game that makes sense. That's all I'm saying for guys who have Michael Thomas and are waiting to know what the real deal is. He came back to practice, but I just don't think they're going to rush him back. It's been 1, 2, 3. Bye week, it'll be 4. Right? So it'll be like 5 weeks before Michael Thomas would step on a football field again. So this all makes sense. So let's move on forward, shall we? So moving past the Saints, I think they'll be fine. Like I said earlier, they usually have bad Septembers, and now it's October, and they might be able to pull off a little run. Let's move on to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is in a little bit of flux. They did win, of course, last week against the LA Chargers. They were at a strong disadvantage, right? It was not great what was going on It was a tough game. It's like these last few weeks, we've seen some rough stuff out of Tom Brady, but then Tom Brady does this thing where he throws for 5 touchdowns and we all forget. But I'm not going to forget. Tom threw the ball 46 times for 369. He can still throw the ball. I think that's the biggest thing. We were worried about all these old quarterbacks. Can they still throw the ball? Yes, they can still throw the ball. But it wasn't a normal off season for them, and they need more time than most of these young guys. So they just don't have they didn't have the reps that they needed. You would think that these young guys need the reps to learn the offense. These guys don't need to learn the offense. Well, Drew Brees doesn't need to learn the offense. Tom Brady needs to be comfortable within this Bruce Arians offense, for one. And two, he has to get chemistry with these guys and these receivers. And a lot of the guys that he did have chemistry with have been in and out of the lineup. Of course, they lose O.J. Howard, which stinks if you did have him. Right, that's not great. O.J. Howard did score a touchdown, if I remember correctly, too, which is also not too great, right? Rob Gronkowski had 1 catch for 29 yards. It was a good beamer that he had over the top of the field. But Mike Evans had 7 receptions for 122, 1 touchdown. Scotty Miller had a touchdown. So if you started Scotty Miller out of faith, it worked out for you this time in the fantasy world. But Tom turned things around. It all went down after the fumble that happened from Joshua Kelly. He only had 9 carries for 7 yards. They really couldn't run the ball at all. Of course, Austin Eckler came out of the game, and it just became a shootout. And I think that was more impressive to me, at least, was that Justin Herbert, for the majority of the game, he looked solid. I think Justin Herbert's going to be a good player. Receiving wise, Keenan Allen ate up most of the carries or most of the receptions. He had 8 receptions. They really had no answer for him in the passing game. Terrion Johnson burned one. Like, that was the beautiful pass that he had where he threw a straight dot for a touchdown. No one else could touch him. But I'm worried about Tampa going forward just because the injuries are kind of piling up. Ronald Jones looked good, though. I forgot to mention Ronald Jones, 20 carries, 111 yards. No TDs, though. So, you can't add carries, unfortunately, to fantasy points. But, 11 fantasy points for what he gave you, plus the 6 receptions if you play PPR, 17 reception yards. He did solid, right? He had a solid game plan. But going forward, Tampa Bay does have an interesting schedule coming forward for them. They play the Bears, they play Green Bay, they play the Raiders, and they play the Giants, right? So Green Bay is, of course, the toughest game they're probably going to have, but don't sleep on the Raiders, because I think the Raiders are one of those teams that, if they're in the game and it's close, they can stake a game from you. They're still in that realm where they're like probably 7-9 material, but you could be one of those 7 that they steal from you. The Bears their record. You would make them think that they would make you think that they're better than what they are, but they're not that great, right? We know this. That's a night game coming up next week against the Bears, and Green Bay is the 18th. That's probably going to be the Fox 5 game of the week, or whatever Fox channel you are. We're at Fox 5. So that would be the Fox game of the week, probably. That'll be a home game for Tampa Bay. Aaron Rodgers versus Tom Brady. It's going to be a big-time matchup. Hopefully they have Devontae Adams back. I don't believe Devontae Adams plays this week either, this Monday night. So that's going to be interesting for them. And finally, what we're going to move on to now is Dallas. Let's get into Dallas and what they have going forward for the rest of the season, because I have a lot of things invested in Dallas Cowboys, and I'm a little bit concerned for them. Not really, but I am. So Dallas, for all intents and purposes, for fantasy-wise, have been basically a success for everybody that is not named Michael Gallup. Everybody else has seen some sort of success, right? Ezekiel Elliott has been kind of in a weird slump as of sorts, but I don't believe that is particularly because Ezekiel Elliott is not as good as he used to be, or he's hurt or anything. I just think that game scripting is a real thing. And unfortunately for Ezekiel Elliott, in the running game, Ezekiel Elliott cannot exist. He did get 8 receptions for 71 receiving yards, so let's keep it in mind. People are saying that Ezekiel Elliott looks different. Yeah, he looks a bit different. He's still getting 4.5 yards a carry. That's still pretty solid. He still does great things, right? Let's not blow our minds here and say Ezekiel Elliott is kind of regressing. I don't think that's the case. I just think that the Cowboys offense has to change because, unfortunately, their defense just gave up 49 points, basically 50 points. Their defense just gave up 50 to the Cleveland Browns. They gave up 38 to the Seahawks. They gave up 40 to the Falcons in a win that shouldn't even be a win. They gave up 39. And they lost to the Rams against a really good Rams defense where they only put up 17. They put up under 17. So only 1 out of the last 4 games they had a game under 21 points. And everything else has been at least 38. That is horrendous. That is some bad stuff. That's honestly scary. What's happening? That defense is, I know there's people hurt, but this is bad. This is bad. This is bad. But what is good is his offense. His offense is impeccable for fantasy. Dak is almost at 70% completion percentage. He has 1,690 yards passing. He's great. He's at 9 touchdowns to 3 picks, but all the picks that he's thrown so far have been bad timing picks at the last minute of the game. So this is all about game winning stuff. So game winner wise, Dak has not been able to seal the deal and win some games where they matter. But, receiving wise, if you have Amari Cooper, you are living life. If you have CeeDee Lamb, you are living life. Michael Gallup, for all intents and purposes, he's not on the same level, right? He's not on the same level, but he's getting some yardage. And Dalton Schultz, he looks really good. He scored a touchdown last game. Cedric Wilson got active a game ago. This team has so many weapons, and this is what we were talking about in the offseason. The Cowboys have so many weapons, you would be a fool not to at least take one of them because they're all going to get a piece of the pie at some point. But if you're wondering, Michael Gallup really didn't get that much of a piece of the pie last game, and that's a bit concerning, right? Michael Gallup wasn't really active for the Cowboys last game. Only 2 receptions, 29 yards. Not great. Amari Cooper had 12 receptions to his own right, and that's pretty sizable. Big thing from the Cleveland side, Odell Beckham sighting. He's looked good these past 2 games, right? 5 receptions, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns receiving, but he did technically have a rushing touchdown too. So 3 touchdowns. He had 2 carries for 73 yards. The in and around was really electric. That looked like Odell of old. And I guess the big thing is Odell nothing was ever really wrong physically with Odell after the initial injuries. He always looked pretty electric. And if you get the ball in his hands early, things, go well. So that's always been a big thing about Odell. Sometimes the easy stuff is hard for him and the hard stuff is easy for him. So that's always the thing. But we're going to move on and take our final break. And coming back, we'll finish out the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, Fantasy Football Podcast, GSMC style. We're back for our last segment and special guest, Mr. Bryce Lewis, co-host of my time on the football podcast for GSMC. He does basketball, football. Bryce, how are you, man? You good?
Yeah, man, I'm good. I'm glad to be a part of the show. I think it's the first time I've been on the fantasy show, I think.
It might be. I don't know. I don't think I've ever asked you to hop on here.
Yeah, so, it's obviously a great honor to be on this show, to be part of one of the best fantasy analysts and experts in the game today.
All right. You're already here. Let's calm down, okay? I'm all right. But I am going to ask your a little bit of opinion. You did win your league last year. You are a league champion of new. Mm-hmm. Reigning champion so far. You're defending your title. How's your season going thus far?
I am currently about to go 4-0.
Oh, look at you. Mm-hmm. Already displaying the same dominance that won you the league the first time.
I don't know. First year was a very up and down year for me. Well, I was just able to come up. I was able to show up in the playoffs. That's all.
Well, sometimes that's all that matters. You just need players that get hot, and it just works out for you. Mm-hmm. Speaking of getting hot, I made some hot trades these past few weeks, and I've discussed them in the podcast of recent, and now I made another one that I haven't really brought up yet. I bet you, if you're a smart cookie here and been listening to the podcast all the way through, you probably guessed what the trade was. But last week, I made a trade for DeAndre Hopkins, right? So, or kind of 2 weeks ago, because it's been 2 weeks since I've had him on my team. It was at the tail end right before week 3. I had him on my team. He played, got like 24 points, no touchdown, but everything was just receptions and yardage. And then this week, same deal, only 7 receptions for 41 yards. The Panthers team, which, is in our favorite division, our favorite team's division, the Panthers team is 2-2. We'll talk about that later on, of course. But I made another trade. So I traded DeAndre Hopkins, or I traded for him for Mark Andrews and I believe someone else. I'd have to go back to the history. But I traded away Mark Andrews and another piece so that way I could get DeAndre Hopkins, and I ended up getting Emmanuel Sanders in that. Hindsight 2020, bad trade for the guy, all in all, I would say. Oh, I remember. I traded James Conner away.
Okay.
So James Conner didn't play, or he's not playing this week, so didn't work. Like, James Conner was fine the last week he played for the most part. So all in all, I felt like it was a decent equal trade. Last week in week 3, Mark Andrews was kind of nowhere to be found this week, even though he only had 3 receptions. 2 of them were for touchdowns. So the guy was fine. DeAndre Hopkins, though, I'm getting worried. I'm getting quite worried about the Arizona Cardinals offense because things are not looking great as far as the distribution of where things are going. Of course, it looks to seem like DeAndre Hopkins is still the number one guy there. But when you play against 2 defenses where the Lions just gave up, 38 points to the Saints. The Panthers' defense is still very young. They're getting better, but you would think that a Kyler Murray-led offense, Cliff Kingsbury can get it done. You would see more. You would think that more points get done. Now, granted, Kyler Murray threw 3 touchdown passes, but it was kind of all for naught. They never really were at a point in that game where they were in control. They only had 270-some yards of offense in total to 444 to the Carolina Panthers. That matters. And I was like, okay. Hopkins has an ankle thing going on. He's playing through it. Whenever you play through an ankle, things just don't always look the way it's supposed to be. So I said, you know what? I'm going to get off him. So I traded him last night, mid-Sunday night football game, for Michael Thomas and Traquan Smith. Traquan Smith is for collateral because I don't know when Michael Thomas is actually going to be back. I'm predicting week 7. I would like to see him come back against the Chargers, but I have a feeling that they're probably going to use him for the divisional game and give him 2 extra weeks of rest because they have a bye week after the LA game. So I think he'll come back for week 7. I already have Emmanuel Sanders on my team. If I plug in Traquan Smith, who for all intents and purposes has looked really solid, I think I'm in that point. Like, I'm going to be 3-1 this week. I already won. I'm just cruising. If I lose this week, so be it. if I lose this week, so be it. And if I lose the next week, I'll be 3-3. That might put me in a weird spot. But then I'll get Michael Thomas back, and hopefully at good health, which I feel like Michael Thomas at good health in what the Saints look like with Michael Thomas is he gets a whole lot of targets, a whole lot of volume. It will be fantastic. I already have Kamara. Like, my team is pretty solid, and I don't feel like DeAndre Hopkins was the reason why I felt my team was strong, in a sense. I have Dak Prescott. I have Kamara. I have Kenny Galladay. I had, Austin Hooper, for all intents and purposes, has looked pretty solid if the Browns can continue to do what they do. They spread the ball a lot, but if their offense clicks, he'll get the ball a little bit more. No Nick Chubb, so we'll see what different changes get made there. But I feel like my team has been putting successes that I haven't sat on guys who show me signs that I might need to look elsewhere. So that's why I traded Hopkins, and the league group chat got really fiery. People were not happy about this trade because technically it was like basically a 1-for-1. Mm-hmm. But I had to drop KJ Hamler because I needed to put place for Traquan Smith. So I'm kind of kicking it old school right now. Right now I have like 3 Saints players on my roster. I used to never do that. I used to tell people don't do that. Don't draft the whole roster, which I didn't. But here I am with a bunch of guys on the Saints who I like a lot. Mm-hmm. So, the group chat went on fire. There were some words said in the group chat that I can't say on this podcast. People think that I made a bad trade. What I just explained to you, what would you dissect this? If this happened in your group chat, how would you feel?
I mean, you felt like this was the best decision for your team, so you can't, you can't, be down on your pick. I mean, the only thing I would probably say about the trade is that you said, DeAndre's playing through an ankle right now, and Michael Thomas is currently out with an ankle right now. So what if he comes back and his ankle's still not 100%? You're basically back in the same DeAndre Hopkins situation where if he rolls it the wrong way, then he's out again. And then where DeAndre Hopkins, at least he's playing. And I don't expect him to have the same type of offensive results that he had this past week going forward. So I can understand that. Plus, it's like you're not getting instant impact. It's like you're waiting for impact later. This is later in the season I'm going to get an impact.
More of this is the long game I'm playing here.
Yeah, so I think
I'm betting on.
I think sometimes in fantasy we think that we need something instantly, where sometimes we just need to be able to hold firm till a certain player gets back, and then that's when you feel like you can maybe take off with your team. So you also got Traquan Smith, and you said, obviously he's getting more, targets with Michael Thomas out. So as long as he continues to make a game, obviously I know he's considered y'all deep threat in the Saints too. So if he maybe makes a big touchdown, he's going to get you points. And honestly, like if I'm assuming you're going to have him in the lineup since you traded for him. Is that accurate to say?
Traquan?
Yeah.
Well, it all depends on the matchup. I feel like against the Chargers, I would probably have him in the lineup just because I think him and Emmanuel Sanders are getting some chemistry with Drew that looks good. And I think that Drew Brees had his best game last week against Detroit. He looked really solid if you actually watched him play. Have had some zip on the ball. He looked like Drew of old. It took 4 weeks. Same thing with Tom Brady. He had a shake. He had another pick 6. Maybe it's just a Tampa Bay thing. I don't know. Maybe we need to start throwing some apologies toward Jameis's way. But at the same time, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the question would be, what are you expecting from Traquan? Are you just like, give me 10, 12 points a week and I'm good? Are you expecting like what?
If you give me 11.
11?
If I put you in the starting lineup, I'm expecting at least 11 to 12 points.
Okay. I mean, that's doable. Yeah. Like I said, since you're playing the long game, as long as he can get you what you expect on a week-to-week basis, I don't see anything wrong with the trade. Yeah. And like I said, Michael Thomas does get healthy, and he can stay healthy, and he's back to being Michael Thomas, then it looks like a very good trade. Because, they're both number one receivers. They both get high volumes of catches, so it's not like one guy is more of a touchdown machine than the other guy. Right now, like I said, the Cardinals just aren't playing the best offensively. That's why he's not playing the best. And then obviously the Saints, we'll see what happens when he does come back. Hopefully there's no other injuries. Hopefully Drew continues to play well. And you probably, you still got a number one receiver at the end of the day. And you really can't argue with that. I mean, I still have Julio and he's hurt. But, I'm not going to get rid of Julio just because it's like, hey, when he is healthy, we know what Julio can do. So
right. And like we've seen this with Julio before, right? Like Julio's had ankles turf toe.
Turf, ankle, hamstring, calf.
Yeah. Still, like, you know, he's still as dominant. He went in the, like, he was a fringe first round guy this year in fantasy. And first game, he looked like the best wide receiver in the league as far as I'm concerned. And then, you know, injuries. There it happens again. And, you know, thankfully for the Falcons, if you drafted him, they have another number one potential guy in fantasy football.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Ridley.
Yeah. Calvin Ridley looks incredible. So that's where my head is at. You know, it's week 4. We've had some significant things happen in the football space, but so far so good for fantasy for me. You know, I started off rough. I went 0-1, but I turned it around. I've won 3 straight so far. Things are up. We're up right now. I feel like I have a right to take some, or I have the time to take some risk. You know, it's a 13-week fantasy season. Granted, we may not even know if we finished fantasy, and I hope so. You know, things got really sketchy here in the past week and the last weekend for different NFL teams. But I think the NFL is going to push on through this COVID stuff, because that's just looked like what they've always planned to do. So I don't think that will change any much. So I think 13 weeks, you know, I can wait a few weeks. I can wait 2 weeks to see if Michael Thomas ends up being the guy who I think Michael Thomas always is, no matter what the situation is. And if he's a little banged up, everybody's going to be a bit banged up at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, man, I think the trade's fine. I don't really see what all the uproar is about.
Well, the uproar is about
I guess it's
you
like,
traded for injured guy. You get no instant value.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's what
they
saying.
want that instant.
Yeah.
It's like, why would you want instant value? Why would you want future value and stuff like that? So,
well, people just not thinking. That's the number one thing. Nobody's thinking here all the time. I'm trying to put forward thinking. I got to do stuff that brings entertainment to the podcast. They don't think about this sort of stuff. I do. This is why I do this for a living. And other people, you know, they just play fantasy football. I live it. This is where I make the big bucks here. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, man. This man even being DraftKings making some money.
Nah, man. Real quick, did you do any gambling? Did you do any
I didn't do any. I didn't do any.
I did a parlay. I lost bad. I did a parlay on a Broncos win, which they did win, but I bet the under on points as a total. I thought the Broncos and Jets would have an under total of 41 points. Not the case.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I wouldn't have. I feel like games that 2 bad teams can be very high scoring games. Just because they're you know
bad.
what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, so. I should have seen that one coming, you know. Once again, the Thursday night game curse bites me again. There's always one team that ends up dropping all the points, and the other team kind of struggles. And even in this game, both teams found a way to hurt me bad. So, yeah, that parlay got put to rest.
I should put a parlay on the Heat game last night.
Oh, Heat game? Oh, man. That was LeBron. Where was that? How do you feel, real quick? You got like 30 seconds. How do you feel about LeBron walking off the court?
I mean, that's not surprising. LeBron does that sometimes, where he knows the game's over. It's just like, okay, time to go. Like, I mean, I know some people may want him to stay on the court, but he probably was just like, all right, this game's over, whatever. We're going to go to the next game.
Yeah, I mean, there's still games finished. There's still time to finish in the series, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't like it was Game 7 and they just lost and he just walked off the court. That would be...
Yeah, that would be more...
I think this is like the whole Cam Newton thing, where he left the press conference. Yeah. And people just have not forgiven Cam for doing that since, but hey. But that'll be it for your GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for this Tuesday. Hope you all have a good rest of your week. We'll see you Friday to talk about what's coming up in the week ahead for Week 5 and all your interesting news. We'll see if more coaches get fired. I doubt it, but you never know, right? Falcons still playing, so we'll figure it out. Had to throw that one in there for my boy. But don't forget, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Subscribe to our Facebook and Twitter as well, or should I say follow, not subscribe. Follow our Facebook, Twitter, GSMC Fantasy Football for more news, topics, and discussions. Hit us up, man. We might answer some questions. GSMC. We'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.